This is Aaron Ra. Yeah.
How you do, everybody? Let me get this thing open and on. All right, in my youth, I was never much interested in politics. Matter of fact, I remember when I first signed up to vote, when I first registered to vote, the girl asked me if I was a Republican or a Democrat, and I said, "How do I know?" I really didn't know. She said, "You're a Democrat." And I said, "How do you know?" And she said she wouldn't tell me. But you know, that was when I was in my 20s, and it's been much more recently that I found that I have to become more politically involved. This began when I first encountered Christian conspirators on Usenet. I didn't learn about the wedge strategy from the NCSE or the news media, but rather from Christian reconstructionists themselves. You don't know what reconstructionist is? It's kind of like revisionary. It's where they rewrite history and rewrite the structure of everything and then say that's the way it always was. Like a villain in a James Bond movie, one of these guys bragged to me about how many senators and judges his collection of church groups had positioned all according to their plan. That plan, laid out around Y2K, was supposed to culminate in a hold on, let me close something. That wasn't supposed to happen. Okay, that plan was supposed to culminate in a court case wherein a conservative Republican Bush-appointed judge was supposed to rule in their favor. And when that court case eventually came in the form of Kitzmiller versus Dover, no one expected the judge to rule with as much integrity as he did. So the strategy had to change. All secular citizens, including moderate Christians, need to understand that the separation of church and state was never about teaching evolution in school, or whether children could pray in school. It was never about abortion either. That is the limit of most people's conception, but the scope is much broader than that. You see hints of it, hints of the real situation, whenever religious groups have significant influence over local communities. From my own experience, I used to live in predominantly Mormon towns where it was often difficult to find a job if you weren't a Mormon yourself. For another example, around Y2K, Ted Haggard's church group announced, or they were trying to rewrite the Constitution. They wanted to amend the Colorado state Constitution to write in prejudice so that they could discriminate against people for employment or housing on the grounds of sexual orientation. When interviewed, Ted Haggard, in a moment of what is now an extreme irony, said that as Christians, they had an obligation to treat certain people differently. I couldn't understand how people cannot recognize what kind of bigotry this is, and that it is even bigotry at all. The people who are overtly bigoted against gays now are often the same people who were openly bigoted against blacks years ago. For example, my wife and I toured the Oral Roberts University when we came back from the Oklahoma Free Thought Convention. That's where Michelle Bachmann got her degree, if that tells you anything. And it's kind of a scary thing. That school, when Oral Roberts was still alive, would suspend students for interracial dating and would expel them for interracial marriage. How is it that this was not recognized? How is it that this was tolerated? Why did nobody say, hey, that is bigotry, that is prejudice, that is insufferable in our situation? They allow it because their community permits it, because they have a dominant faction of believers, and know they will speak their mind when they have the safety of numbers to do so. So what if you're not just in charge of a school or a town or a state? What if they're in charge of the whole country, a world power seeking dominion over all? Reconstructionism effectively began with R.J. Rushdoony of the Chalcedon Institute. I'm sure most of you have probably not heard of him, but it was a while back. He was a racist, misogynist, Christian dominionist who unabashedly denounced democracy in favor of an American theocracy, which he hoped would be so extremist that it would enforce Levitical law. The commandments given in the book of Leviticus, the one that gives a price list for slaves, and which orders a death sentence for anyone who has sex outside of marriage or who works on weekends. The book commanding that disobedient children be stoned to death. Surely no one who actually believes anything that crazy could be elected to represent the citizens of a secular government, right? Right. Yeah. And then we found out about, what is the name, Paul Braun, and what's that guy, Fuckwad? Fuckwa. Or is it Fuckwo? I never got it right. I think that's the standard reaction you're supposed to give. Okay, so maybe a few inexcusable exceptions might get in. But they couldn't take over the entire Republican Party, right? Could they own the Senate and the presidency? No way. What else? A lot of folks are concerned about having yet another devoutly religious whack job as president, but that's just a 4-year run, and we've survived that before. I'm more concerned with who sits on the Supreme Court, because that decision could cause continuing damage for decades lasting much longer. At least 1 and perhaps 3 justices will be replaced within the next 4 years, and Romney has already said that he will put in more people like Scalia and Thompson. He wants right-wing, religious, conservative Republicans. According to our own Eddie Tabish, the slightest balance of influence on that panel could result in the end of our democratic constitutional republic and bring about an American theocracy. What would that mean? I would say that whenever religion has rule over law, that madness will reign with automatic violations of human rights. But maybe I'm being alarmist. What do they say? How can we know what sort of society they envision? We know that they are nearly all Republicans now, and that party has been virtually assimilated by them. And we know that they will speak more freely when they feel the safety of numbers. So let's look at the Republican Party platform of one of the red states, a very red state. As a Texas State Director of American Atheists, my own state leaps immediately to mind. I've already provided links and specifics on my blog, but I will review a few of these here. Of course, they want to make pornography illegal. No surprises there. They also want to be able to filibuster the U.S. Senate again. For those of you who don't know what filibuster means, it means that you can intentionally waste everyone's time pointlessly, particularly when you can't defend any objection with a valid argument. Anyone who has ever debated a creationist will certainly understand how important this tactic is to their strategy or absence of fact. Regarding the environment, they strongly support the immediate repeal and abolishment of the Endangered Species Act. Remember that these people don't believe in evolution, so they don't understand the importance of biodiversity, and they don't care about the rights of animals either. They want to dominate and subdue the earth just like their abominable doctrine demands. So they strongly oppose all efforts of environmental groups and stymie business interests, especially those of the oil and gas industry. I find that when you take the quotes from the actual policy and remove just the adjectives, you get a completely different meaning. Under the heading, Free Speech for the Clergy, they urge amendment of the Internal Revenue Code to allow religious organizations to endorse political candidates and lobby for votes without fear of losing their tax-exempt status. Of course, they also want official state endorsement, promotion, display, and defense of religious symbols and slogans. If you want to know what those values are, and of course the slogans are declaring that the United States is a nation founded on Christian values. And if you want to know what those values are, you can read the book of Leviticus, I can't say that word, and prepare to be horrified. Texas Republicans not only want marriage to be restricted to one man and one woman, despite what the Bible says, but they insist that it must be a natural man and a natural woman. You hear that, Zinnia? So transgendered people would be completely ostracized under the law should they get their way. There's no civil union options for gay couples either, because the platform also opposes the creation, recognition, or benefits of partnerships outside of marriage that are provided by some political subdivisions. As if that weren't enough, they also want to define the word family such that it excludes homosexual couples. They say they deplore sensitivity training. Think about that for a moment. And they state very clearly that they want homosexuality condemned as unacceptable. They mean that very strongly, too, so strongly, in fact, that they oppose any criminal or civil penalties against those who oppose homosexuality as a reaction of religious faith. In fact, they go so far as to urge the immediate repeal of the hate crimes law, specifically where that relates to sexual orientation. Are you getting this? If you're uncertain whether that includes acts of violence, there are at least 2 members of the current State Board of Education who implied that it should. And we know of a few Tea Partiers who insist that homosexuals should be executed, murdered by the state. I am alarmed at how popular this abominable sentiment is. This is their Republican Party platform I'm reading from. Do you get this? Under the heading, Supporting Motherhood, they strongly support women who choose to devote their lives to their families and raising their children. But they implicitly object to women choosing other options such as college, careers, or not having children at all. A woman's ambition beyond the confines of the kitchen and obeisance to her husband is decried by conservatives as a deplorable assault on the family, which of course they blame on liberals. Regarding the right to life, they say that all innocent human life must be respected and safeguarded from fertilization to natural death. Notice a few subtle caveats here. The qualifier of protecting only innocent life is how Texas Republicans justify having executed more prisoners than any other state in the Union, nearly 5 times as many as the next deadliest state, in fact. Says something about Christian forgiveness, doesn't it? Too bad they haven't gotten an excuse for why the murder rate is an average of 25% higher in states that have the death penalty versus those who don't. Obviously, capital punishment doesn't really work as a deterrent, especially in areas where Christian criminals are so prevalent that no one believes their death is final and everyone thinks that their faith will be their salvation regardless what sins they commit. Otherwise, the qualifier of natural death means the religious right will deny the right to die to those who wish to in order to escape the agony and indignity of untreatable and insufferable diseases. The definition of life beginning at fertilization is a curious one too, for several reasons, all of them religious. First of all, Jewish law held that the fetus was only water for the first 45 days. After that, it was considered a limb of the mother until birth. Specifically, they described the fetus as her thigh. Now get out your King James and read Numbers 5, verses 21 through 27. Another oddity about preserving life from the point of fertilization and calling them innocent is that babies may be born in sin, according to most of these religious madmen, and are therefore not innocent at any point. But they also ignore that babies could be born from an act of sin by their own definition. And they want to force rape victims to endure that dangerous indignity as well, even when they are very young and their lives should be protected from such myopic legislation. Worse still, this platform says that a person who injures or kills an unborn child should be subject to criminal and civil litigation, and this includes when it happens by accident. The proponents of this platform have stated that girls who suffer miscarriage should be investigated as potential homicides. Imagine your teenage daughters having to endure that on top of having lost a potential child. So you can't kill an undeveloped fetus under any circumstances, even if you were raped by your AIDS-infected father and the sonogram has detected significant life-infringing defects. But according to some Republicans, once the baby is born, then you can kill it with legal impunity, if that child fails to respect your authority. Texas Republicans already endorse corporal punishment in the classroom, so why not capital punishment as well? Of course, the Texas Republican Party platform also opposes actions of social agencies to classify traditional methods of discipline as child abuse. Spare the rod, spoil the child, right? I don't know about any of you, but the traditional method of discipline in my family was a switch. For those of you unfamiliar with that is, or what that is, imagine an 8-year-old boy being instructed to go out and get a stick, a live one, a green one, strip all the leaves and stems off and make sure to test it to make sure it does that whoop noise in the air. So they can make that noise against the back of your thighs a few times. Our Republican Party platform is opposed to all methods of birth control, both preventative contraception and the morning after pill. Remember that in Texas they oppose any sex education other than abstinence until marriage. That's why our state has the highest rate of repeat teen pregnancies of the country. So they're creating a welfare-dependent populace, but they also want to abolish all the welfare programs that these struggling kids will need. This will not only create an unnecessarily stressful condition for both parents and children, it will also ultimately eliminate the middle class. Our Republicans want to do away with all government-sponsored programs that deal with early childhood development, and they include preschool and kindergarten in that list, but they don't stop there. They also want to abolish the Department of Education, because why would a religious organization want people to be educated? And the real reason is because our secular government, which this country still is, will not permit state-funded schools to promote one religion over any other, and that is exactly what Texas Republicans want to do. This platform actually wants to allow unqualified instructors, as well as students, to undermine education in science classrooms without fear of retribution or discrimination of any kind. That's the way it's worded. Thus, with no form of disciplinary restraint or academic accountability, matters of demonstrable fact would be deliberately misrepresented as if they were mere speculation. Under the heading of knowledge-based education, and you're going to love this, they really do come right out and say, we oppose the teaching of higher order thinking skills, critical thinking skills, and similar programs which challenge the students' fixed beliefs and undermine parental authority. They say that. Look it up. They're opposed to knowledge. Knowledge, facts, higher order thinking, whenever that might challenge their mere baseless beliefs, which they insist must be fixed, even when many of these assumptions have already been proven wrong and none of them were ever justified. Under the ironic heading of safeguarding our religious liberties, they interpret the First Amendment to mean something other than what it actually says or could possibly imply. Instead, they demand that church and state be fused into one, that the power of faith-based institutions be increased, and that public acknowledgement of their God be undeniable. Did you get that? They don't want you to be able to deny their God. If they have their way, they won't allow it. They want forced conformity. Remember, they said the public, that's you, must acknowledge the existence of their God. And they will punish that under the full penalty of law, just like they do in every theocracy. Anyone know the penalty for blasphemy? It's death. Just like it always is whenever religion is threatened, especially the Abrahamic religions. Violence is only the answer for those who don't understand the question. And religion is a misunderstanding of everything. This platform does say, and I quote, "As America is a nation under God founded on Judeo-Christian principles, we affirm the constitutional right of all individuals to worship in the religion of their choice." How sweet of them. However, despite what it says in Article 6 of the Constitution, atheists are prohibited from holding any public office in Texas. And recently in Virginia, neo-pagan witches were denied clergy status by their courts. That decision was overturned by Americans United for the Separation of Church and State, reminding the Arlington court system how they violated both the establishment and free exercise clauses of the First Amendment and the U.S. Constitution and the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. In another atrocious example of religious prohibition, the governor of Missouri in 1838 passed an unconstitutional law popularly known as the Mormon Extermination Order, which allowed militia to hunt down and slaughter Mormon families and drive them from their homes. That's why they moved to Utah. That law was not repealed until 1976. Remember, this platform is an illustration of the society they're trying to create. That's what the American theocracy would be. Their dream is a nightmare to rational, moderate, tolerant, understanding people. Religion is not reasonable. The more influence they have, the more they'll abuse it. At chalcedon.edu, they say that theocracy in biblical law is the closest thing to a radical libertarianism that can be had. R.J. Rushdoony himself said that the state, the school, the arts and sciences, law, economics, and every other sphere without exception is to be under Christian dominion. We atheists literally don't have a prayer. Fortunately, both sides know that prayer doesn't work. That's why we must. We have the advantage of living in the information age, and the information is finally out. That's why Ireland and Rome and other places that were theocracies are now largely atheist. Faith is dishonest, and religion is evidently absolutely wrong about absolutely everything. Atheists and other secular citizens know that theocracy is madness, and we have a moral obligation to stop it.